Welcome back to Economic Outlook. Today I want to discuss the crisis over Greece's debt. This issue has raised serious questions over the viability of the euro, as well as the structure of the European Union, the Eurozone, and the European Central Bank. I want to explain how the structure of these organizations has contributed to the crisis and how it's helping to deal with the problems Greece is facing. I'll also look at what's happening in Greece itself and explain why this debt crisis is so important to Europe and to the global economy as a whole. To understand why Greece's debt is a problem for the European Union, it's important to understand the historical backdrop for the EU and the European Central Bank. The European Union was formed by treaty in 1993 and today is comprised of 27 member states who share a single market goal for the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. A European political history helps to define the role and responsibility of the European Union vis-à-vis the individual governments of its member states. The European Union was formed after a series of economic arrangements like the European Coal and Steel Community were formed after World War II. And this shows that from its inception, the goal of the European Union has been economic cooperation and not political alignment. It's easy to recognize the economic advantages of cooperation between countries like France and Germany, but it's much harder to envision the two nations accepting any form of joint governance. Now, for these reasons, the European Union is designed to protect the sovereignty of its member states, but encourage economic cooperation. This is of critical importance when we look at the role of the European Central Bank in the European Union's monetary policy. The European Central Bank was established by the Treaty of Amsterdam in 1998. The Maastricht Treaty set the foundation for a common European currency to begin no later than January 1st, 1999. The European Central Bank was created to administer this currency and set monetary policy. And today, 16 of the 27 members of the EU use the euro, and this is referred to as the Eurozone. Countries that use the euro are part of the Eurozone. This is a subset of the general European Union. The adoption of the euro demonstrates the difficulties the European Union has faced when setting common policy. Some EU members, like the United Kingdom, actually opted to keep their own currencies rather than switch to the euro. The UK preferred to be able to set its own monetary policy rather than defer to the European Central Bank. The theme of sovereignty versus unity extends into the European Central Bank's main function. The ECB has a stated mandate to guard against inflation. Other central banks, like the United States Federal Reserve, don't have similar mandates. The primary goal of the ECB is to control inflation, and this has a historical precedent. This is based on Europe's experience with several periods of devastating hyperinflation, for example, prior to World War II in Weimar Germany. So the European Central Bank was designed explicitly to control inflation, and other monetary policies are actually secondary. And this is very important when it comes to intervening in an individual country's monetary policy, as we'll see in the case of Greece. The current crisis in Greece is testing the European Central Bank's ability to manage monetary policy without having any actual political influence over its member states. For example, the European Central Bank cannot directly intervene to bail out a country like Greece. This forces the other members of the Eurozone, like Germany and France, to contemplate actions on their own. And this raises questions of the political will of individuals within other countries to actually conduct monetary policy on behalf of neighbors in another country. Now, to discuss Greece directly, I believe there are three reasons why the situation in Greece is especially important. First, Greece is actually at risk of defaulting on its debt. Right now, Greece may not be able to roll over its current debt and make interest payments on the bonds it has issued. These bonds are denominated in euros, so if Greece defaults on its obligations, the euro, and thus the entire Eurozone, will actually suffer. This will happen for two reasons. First, other countries and banks have direct exposure to Greek bonds, so if Greece does default, the value of these securities will collapse and the bondholders will lose money. We've all had experience with that in the recent financial crisis. Now, second, and possibly more importantly, the value and stability of the euro itself is actually threatened. Since the currency is shared across 16 countries, individual consumers and investors will feel a direct impact if the value of the euro is affected by collapse of Greek debt. Now, since the European Central Bank can't intervene directly, other Eurozone members have to support Greece, and in doing so, support their own currency stability. So today we see larger countries like Germany and France are working on potential loan guarantees and some other measures to help stabilize Greece and the euro. The second main problem is that the size of Greece's debt obligations are difficult to measure. One of the key problems facing the Eurozone as it contemplates what to do with Greece's debt is that the true size of the problem is very difficult to measure. Greece, like many of its counterparts in the Eurozone, has used a variety of financial techniques to obfuscate the true size of its debt expenditures. Now, the reason a country like Greece conceals its financial activities stems from its use of the euro. Member countries actually have a debt cap of 60% of GDP and can have budget deficits of no more than 3% per year. These requirements are meant to help standardize the financial activities of the member nations, but they can create an incentive for countries to try to find ways around the rules. This lack of transparency directly affects other countries which use the euro. Their own balance sheets come into question, and people wonder what kind of financial transactions are actually taking place for many of Europe's central banking houses. This causes a lot of questions around the euro and whether or not other countries may be in similar situations to Greece. And that brings me to my third point. The third important component of Greece's debt crisis is that problems, both social and political, may be transferred to other countries in Europe if the crisis in Greece continues to worsen. Greece's efforts to curb deficits and regain control of its budget have already fostered a series of strikes and have created a general sense of social instability and political unrest. And unfortunately, the worst is probably yet to come on that front. If bailout efforts fail and Greece does default, attention will naturally turn to other weaker economies with high debt loads, like Spain or Italy. As more countries face similar questions, this will create political and monetary pressure for the rest of the Eurozone, and specifically France and Germany. People will begin to wonder how long larger nations like Germany will have sort of the political endurance to continue to support their neighbors and stabilize the euro. This could lead people to question the long-term viability of the euro. And I don't actually think the euro is in danger of immediate collapse because of this situation. But it does show how the institutions within Europe, the European Union and the European Central Bank, have specific limitations which also make the euro limited in its usefulness as a potential reserve currency, for example. If these questions continue to mount over Greece, then potentially Italy and Spain, it's much more difficult to make a case for using the euro as a reserve currency in place of the dollar or a market basket of other currencies. In conclusion, I just want to note that I don't mean to denigrate the euro in favor of any other currency like the pound or the dollar or anything else that's out there. I think most major currencies have severe questions facing them. The dollar has tremendous deficits, and the United Kingdom and the pound are also under similar debt pressures. You see the same thing in Japan with the yen. So these currency problems aren't relegated strictly to the euro. The main point I want to make is that the European Union has a really unique situation here because they have a central monetary policy board, but they don't have the actual ability to intervene politically with member states. It's up to individuals to actually take action. And this is very different from countries like the United States. So, in conclusion, like I said, I don't think the euro is in imminent danger of collapse or that the Eurozone will somehow fall apart. And I do think the euro, the European Central Bank, and the European Union as a whole have done great things in offering an alternative reserve currency to the dollar and in increasing commerce in Europe and in helping the general welfare of several of the smaller nations of Europe. So I don't mean to somehow pick on the euro or any of these individual countries. I just wanted to demonstrate how the institutions themselves are different than those that you see in other nations, and these institutions can create challenges and difficulties when faced with crisis. So, in conclusion, I hope you've enjoyed this brief look at Greece's current situation, and I'll be back in probably 2 weeks with another entry. So, thanks as always for watching, and be sure to check out my website at www.econoutlook.com. Thanks.